I've been getting beat up a little bit about my comments on the ISS. And I don't think it's fair, and maybe it is fair because I haven't done a good job of explaining where these comments are coming from. Most people, when they hear people critiquing the space program, they assume it's, the voice of somebody who's, just a Luddite. Somebody says, well, why do we have to be up in space? Look at all that wasted money we could be spending on the Earth. Well, okay, I've heard that. I've heard that my entire life. Maybe that's a valid question, but I'm not one of those people. I'm not one of those people. I actually am wicked into space exploration. I'm wicked into doing something in space that is both cool and valuable and has some future potential. So to say that, you should just shut up because, you don't know what the hell you're talking about. Well, I've designed spacecraft. I study, planetary systems. I've been well aware of the history of the space program my entire life. I got up in the middle of the night to watch Apollo 12 land. Everybody else, said, oh, I remember where I was when Apollo 11 landed, and I remember where I was when Neil Armstrong walked on the moon. Well, I remember where I was when Apollo 12 landed. I was, listening to the radio when Apollo 13 had its, tank blow up. And I climbed out of bed as a kid and I went downstairs and I told my parents what had happened. And I told my parents what I thought the odds were of their survival. And I watched Alan Shepard on the moon. And I watched, Dave Scott and Jim Irwin on the moon. And I watched, all of the others. It's like, and I clipped pictures out of Life magazine and plastered them all over my walls as a kid. So I think my credentials as a space person are pretty solid. And to accuse me and to say that, I'm just, a Luddite and a critic and a naysayer and somebody that says, oh, what a waste of money it is to be in space, that's not a valid point. Okay, so I've challenged that. Hopefully I've made my point that I'm not one of these people that you think I am. I'm a spacecraft systems engineer. I'm a researcher. I'm somebody who, knows how the universe works to some extent. I pay attention. I care. And because I care, I look at the International Space Station and I add up the numbers and I say, well, okay, we're spending just about the same on the International Space Station that we spent to go to the moon. Do they have this, if you compare one against the other, inspiration, science, technology development, all of these things, it's like, it's not quite the same category to my way of thinking. I'm not going to say it's a complete waste. I'm not going to even say it's a partial waste. It's more like the jury's still out. We still have 7 to 12 years of useful, flight capability with the International Space Station. So the jury is still out. We could still accomplish a lot there. But what goes on there are 130 automated experiments for the most part. There are some manual experiments. But if an experiment is automated, why do you need people? We have built a big machine, a big spacecraft, but we don't have the capability to build that today. It required the space shuttle to launch a lot of those modules. So we couldn't build the International Space Station again, even if we wanted to. And we've learned a lot in the process, and hopefully the answer isn't, this is how we built it, this is how we want to build things in the future because we know it works. That's a pretty classic space problem. It's like, well, we don't want to do anything new because we got something to work in, and it's like, how do you know that the new technology will work? But clearly, some things went well with building the space station, and some things we've said to ourselves, or somebody said to themselves, maybe not publicly, but man, we could have done a little bit differently. And so I'm not going to go down a long list of critiques of the space station, how it could be better. Clearly it has value in international cooperation. Clearly it has value in lots and lots of experience with lots and lots of different people living in a weightless environment. and it could begin to ask the question, you know, is that really an environment that's really a good idea? Maybe we need to have a little bit of artificial gravity. I don't know. That question is still being asked, and we have a lot of science that's being put to the test there. But okay. And then the argument, oh, well, it inspires. But most people I know don't even know that we have a space station. And the people that know that we have a space station, except maybe for Chris Hadfield, nobody's heard of anybody who's ever flown on the space station. So, yeah, and people who are inspired are clearly inspired. It's like, yes! You know, but just about everybody else, the vast majority of people who live on this planet either don't know that there's a space station or don't care. It's not anywhere near the same kind of inspiration as the early parts of the Apollo program. And once we landed on the moon and got back and had our ticker tape parades, frankly, there was a lot of disinterest, a lot of waning interest from that point onward. And that's never returned. And the International Space Station has not come close to bringing interest back. And you know, maybe there's an argument to be made that it's only just so much you can expect. I mean, great things only happen every so often. There was quite a bit of interest when the Curiosity rover landed on Mars. So that shows that when something cool, really new, really unique, really exciting happens in space, you know, the interest rises for a while. It rises for a while, and then it settles back because people have bills to pay. They have their life to live. And then the enthusiasts are still into it because the enthusiasts that's what they do. They follow everything. So anyhow, I want to keep this video short, but I'm just saying I want, you know, people to challenge themselves to look at it in reality and ask themselves, you know, for the $100 billion or $120 billion or however many billions of dollars we've spent to build the space station, have we gotten our money back yet? And it's like, okay, well, there's one other argument. It's like all the spin-offs, but realistically, these days, in the post-Apollo age, most so-called spin-offs are largely technologies that almost already existed. They need a little bit more funding to bring them to market. And they get pitched to NASA, and NASA says, oh, yeah, that will be something we could use. I mean, maybe that's a little too categorical, but I would say the lion's share of technology that's supposedly spun off by NASA is really technology that's being developed in companies, and they go to NASA for funding, and NASA and the companies find out that there's some value to the space program. But in terms of things that just sort of ground up, that get built specifically for space and no other reason, and then later find a market on Earth, that doesn't happen as much anymore. That really doesn't happen as much anymore, because you have companies like Apple and Motorola, and all of these companies have their research and development, commercial development programs, and it's really, NASA is not the source of technology in terms of proportion that it used to be, say, in the 1960s. So yeah, clearly somewhere there's some spin-offs from the ISS, but it's really hard to say, you know, that there's $100 billion in economic activity that's produced by that. Okay, so I just wanted to touch on the spin-off thing, just so that, you know, it doesn't come back, you know, like later in the comments saying, well, you didn't talk about spin-offs. Spin-offs are paying for this thing. Well, there's a long laundry list of claims for spin-offs, but if you look at those and ask, you know, would those have not happened, you know, if without this space station, would these things have not happened? That's kind of a hard answer to give. I think that most so-called spin-offs would have happened anyhow. So anyhow, I mean, everybody's grasping for straws to justify the space station, and I'm just saying, forget about that. Just forget about that. To say we have 7 to 12 years left. We still have time to think about what we could do with this thing. We still have things that maybe we could learn that we haven't learned yet. We need to challenge ourselves for the future, as Chris Hadfield will say. Don't look back. Okay, yeah, maybe we spent more money than we wanted to. Maybe the thing is more complicated than it needed to be, or whatever. Okay, but it's there. We're there. We're up in space. We're orbiting the Earth. What are we going to do with the next 7 to 12 years? That's the question. And that's what I want you to take from this video. Not just a critique like, well, I don't know what's going on up there, but more to the point, what could we do? What could we accomplish while we still have the opportunity? What could we do with the space station that takes us to the next step, whatever that step is? Perhaps, visits to Mars, visits, return to the moon, or colonizing the moon, or whatever. Pick something and say, this is where we're heading, and how can we use the space station today to facilitate that? Those are the sorts of things that I want to challenge you to think about.